Have you ever questioned whether aliens are real, or are you a pure skeptic? What if the truth is far more terrifying than we ever imagined? In this video, we dive deep into the chilling accounts of those who claim to have been abducted. Stories of lost time, strange markings, and memories too disturbing to forget. With eerie evidence, unsettling details, and first-hand testimonies, we unravel the mystery, one story at a time. It was a temperate summer evening on September 19, 1961, when husband and wife duo Barney and Betty Hill embarked on their drive home to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, after a brief stay in Montreal, Canada. Their nighttime journey southward on Route 3 took them through the expansive White Mountains, a sub-range of the Appalachians and the most rugged mountain chain in New England. Still, the skies were clear of rain, and it wasn't excessively windy or foggy. It had all the makings of a boring car ride. That is, until the couple saw mysterious lights approaching from the sky. At this point, it was around 10 p.m. Barney and Betty followed the lights into the mountains, and through a pair of binoculars claimed they could see humanoid creatures walking upright on 2 feet from behind the windows of a large spaceship. Then, they saw the strange cigar-shaped craft land in a nearby field. After that, everything went black. The Hills found themselves near Portsmouth by 5 a.m., but the trip should have taken no longer than a few hours, meaning the couple should have been home by 2 a.m. at the latest. They had no recollection of what transpired in between, they would later tell investigators. Complicating matters, when the couple came to, Betty's dress was torn and stained, Barney's shoes were scuffed up, and one of his binocular straps was damaged. About a year later, Barney and Betty sought out hypnosis therapy and were able to recall details of that terrifying night. The two believed they had been victims of an alien abduction, probed and examined aboard the spacecraft before their release. Between 1948 and 1969, the Air Force investigated 12,618 reported UFO sightings. 701 remain unexplained. So while the Hill couple's anecdote was not the first case of a UFO sighting, it did mark the first well-documented, feasibly legitimate UFO abduction in history, according to the University of New Hampshire Library, that has forever cemented the case in the annals of UFO lore. As such, it doesn't even matter if their story is true. Confirmation bias is one hell of a drug. Primed with the idea that the husband and wife had made contact with aliens, other everyday folks soon began to report subsequent, fantastical stories of their own extraterrestrial run-ins. A massive oval-shaped object. Flashes of blue light. 6-foot-tall creatures with elephantine skin. These were some of the most shocking bits of eyewitness testimony from the 1973 Pascagoula abduction in Mississippi, which is today known as the second most famous UFO abduction case in history, according to UFO historian Jerome Clark. The encounter contains such specific details that skeptics wonder if the whole event was an elaborate alien hoax. On the night of October 11, 1973, 42-year-old Charles Hickson and his 19-year-old friend Calvin Parker Jr. were fishing along the Pascagoula River when they heard a strange zipping noise and noticed a glowing, elongated UFO hovering in the sky. Out came 3 robot-like humanoids with slits for eyes and clawed hands. The 2 men reported they were brought aboard the spacecraft and examined before being returned to their spot along the river. 2 key players in the ufology space accepted the story. J. Allen Hynek, chair of the Department of Astronomy at Northwestern University, who would go on to found the nonprofit Center for UFO Studies, and James Harder, who worked at the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, a civilian UFO research group. The local sheriff's department also believed the 2 men. Hickson even passed a lie detector test, a notably unscientific procedure. Still, there were inconsistencies. For instance, Hickson's recounting of events varied. In one case, he said the creatures had slits for mouths, but in another moment, he referred to them as holes. Then there's the small matter of Parker Jr. having fallen unconscious for the duration of the event, as he would later tell investigators. But to box the incident in as either true encounter or hoax sets up a false dichotomy, according to Joe Nickel, a senior research fellow at the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, CSI, a division of the Nonprofit Center for Inquiry. In reviewing the case, I thought there might be another possibility. The 2 men, who might have been drinking before the incident, as Hickson admitted he was after, might have dozed off. He wrote in the May/June 2012 issue of the Skeptical Inquirer, a publication of CSI. Hickson could then have entered a hypnagogic, waking dream state, a trance-like condition between waking and sleeping in which some people experience hallucinations, often with bizarre imagery, including strange beings. Some alleged extraterrestrial run-ins lack the ring of truth. The Travis Walton incident is one of those. Even among UFO enthusiasts, the case is widely regarded as a hoax. According to news reports at the time, the American forestry worker Travis Walton went missing on November 5, 1975. He was riding in a truck with 6 other members of his logging crew when they noticed an illuminated object floating above the ground just off to the side of the road. Walton then leapt from the truck and ran toward the object, which struck him with a ray of blue light. The other crew said they drove away from the scene in fear, but returned 15 minutes later. By that point, Walton and the bright light had vanished. Police and some of the loggers conducted a search for Walton later that evening to no avail. When authorities informed Walton's mother that he had gone missing, she said something so cavalier it shocked them. Well, that's the way these things happen. Over the coming days, she would continually request that police call off the search for Walton. Walton was finally found in the early morning hours of November 13th in Heber, Arizona, after placing a collect call to his sister from a payphone. The operator had recognized Walton's name and tipped off the police. A hypnotherapist who refused to treat Walton after he was initially found described the man as very confused and a lot like the drug addicts he'd treated in the past. He also said Walton had a small wound on the inside fold of his right elbow where one might administer intravenous drugs. Eventually, the National Enquirer landed exclusive access to Walton's story. As part of the interview, Walton took a polygraph test. The examiner concluded Walton had taken part in a gross deception with his alien abduction story. Walton, for his part, had his own explanation. He says he lost consciousness after the beam of light struck him, and that he woke up in a hospital environment where 3 short, bald creatures examined him. He claimed to have lost all other memories up until the moment he found himself walking along a highway 5 days later as the spacecraft flew away. The story became international news, and there was no shortage of detractors. Philip J. Klass, an aerospace journalist who also studied UFOs, spoke about the lack of physical evidence to corroborate Walton's story during a segment of Larry King Live in 1993. Now, you heard Travis and Mike Rogers claim that this beam from the UFO was like a grenade exploding, fire, flame. Hat Travis was knocked 10 feet back. And in his book, Travis, claims he hit his shoulders against the rocks. Now, shortly after Travis reappeared, he was given a physical examination by 2 medical doctors in Phoenix, Dr. Candell and Dr. Saltz. They found no bruise marks. They found no burn marks. They found no physical damage. The only thing was like a needle mark in his elbow. So there was no physical evidence. Further, according to Klass' 2010 book, UFO Abductions, A Dangerous Game, just 2 weeks before his alleged abduction, Walton learned that a job he was working on had fallen behind schedule. And perhaps more importantly, Walton first encountered the Barney and Betty Hill alien abduction story while watching a 1975 made-for-TV film about it, called The UFO Incident. After the movie, according to Klass, Walton discussed the idea of being taken onto a flying saucer. The motive for making all of this up, according to Klass, creating an act of God that Walton and the other loggers could point to as the reason for not completing the job they were behind on, thereby avoiding fines from the Forestry Service for not fulfilling the contract. On the evening of October 21, 1978, 20-year-old pilot Frederick Valentik left a series of haunting messages for air traffic control while completing a 125-mile training flight between Melbourne, Australia, and King Island. In them, Valentik described an unknown object with 4 bright lights flying about 1,000 feet above him. "It's approaching from due east towards me. It seems to be playing some sort of game. Flying at a speed I can't estimate," the young pilot said, as the Associated Press reported at the time. "It's not an aircraft. It is flying past. It is a long shape. I cannot identify more than that. It's coming for me right now," Valentik went on. 1 minute later, he said the strange craft appeared to be stationary. "I'm also orbiting, and the thing is orbiting on top of me also. It has a green light and a sort of metallic light on the outside." Then, Valentik reported his rented single-engine Cessna 182L was running roughly. In his last message, he stated, "It is not an aircraft, seemingly referring to the object pursuing him. Valentika's father would go on to claim that his son had not crashed. He had been taken by a UFO. Indeed, the Australian Air Force received 11 reports of UFO sightings from along the Base Strait, where the plane had disappeared from, though a spokesperson for the Australian Transport Department largely dismissed them as confirmation bias. The reports of UFO sightings came in after Valentika's disappearance was made public. So if not aliens, then what? Australian Transport Department officials speculated that Valentik became disoriented and saw his own lights reflected on the water below. No trace of the plane was ever found. About 3 years after the Hill incident, Lonnie Zamora, a police sergeant for Socorro, New Mexico, spotted a strange object in the late afternoon sky through the windows of his cruiser. He pulled over onto the rocky dirt road to investigate the object, which landed in a steep-sided gully called an arroyo south of the town. The area was desolate, yet Zamora would later state in an interview that he witnessed a bluish flame and a loud roar coming from the direction of the arroyo, per an account from the city of Socorro. 50 feet away from the object, he saw landing gear and a red insignia that Zamora later recreated for investigators. He heard another loud roar, and then the craft took off into the sky, heading toward a nearby canyon. Corroborating what Zamora had witnessed, at least 5 tourists traveling through the area reported seeing the strange UFO in flight. Investigators with Project Blue Book, the code name for a U.S. Air Force unit tasked with investigating UFO sightings in the 1950s and 1960s, would later note the site where Zamora had seen the craft was covered in burn marks, presumably from the exhaust of the ship taking off.